Good morning, everyone. I know I've been away for a bit, but with the year winding down, video ideas are getting harder and harder to come by. I mean, I'm not in Alaska right now, but it's just natural that as the snow's beginning to fall, things kind of lock themselves into place for the winter, and there's not much that really can be done. But it is the perfect time of year for me to do a video that I have meant to do for a very, very long time. And that is to show the entire timeline of my land from the very beginning in 2023 to the modern day. What I've assembled here is about 2 hours of all of the homesteading stuff that I have ever done, compiled into a supercut that you can binge in a single sitting, just one. Now, I do want to lay out some caveats before we get started. A lot of the older footage, it's kind of bad. As in, like, my camera wasn't very good. And while most of the original audio has been removed, I left in a couple pieces because they were just too important to me to remove. But some of those are really, really rough, and I apologize for those in advance because they hurt my soul. As for the actual video quality, it'll get better as the video goes on, I promise. So we're gonna jump right into it, but before we do, quick word from our sponsor, and we will get into the video. Today's video is brought to you by AG1. Let's be real, guys, I don't have a very good diet. I don't have any kind of kitchen to actually prepare anything, so most of what I'm eating is sandwiches and wraps from the nearest stores and gas stations I can find. I'm probably not getting all the vitamins I need, and to be honest, you probably aren't either, which is precisely where AG1 comes in.
Let's get a second opinion. Screamy! Do you like AG1? What about you, sir? Do you like AG1? Come back! I need to ask you questions! I need to ask you questions about the sponsor of my video, please.
AG1, or Athletic Greens, is a probiotic drink with all the vitamins and minerals you need to keep yourself feeling healthy and full of energy. It's great for your gut health, tastes amazing, and if you're at all unhappy with it, it's flexible and risk-free. Adjust, update, or cancel your membership anytime with a 90-day money-back guarantee. Head to my link or scan the QR code to get a free welcome kit, including a bottle of vitamin D and free AG1 travel packs when you first subscribe. It's just the perfect supplement to get all of your vitamins and probiotics in one place, and I really can't recommend it enough. I use it, my mom uses it, and it's just a quality product through and through. Thank you so much to AG1 for sponsoring this video. Let's get right into it. Whew. And we are home. Well, beyond being just absolutely beautiful, there's really not all that much to see. Unfortunately, it's pretty tucked in here. Everything is quite overgrown. Another great plus of this place is the views. I mean, they don't look as grand as they do from my perspective, but really, it's absolutely insane out here. So that first night, after waiting out the heat of the day, I came back with my friend Daniel to open up the land and start clearing a spot for the cabin to go. And almost immediately, we found something very, very cool. I'm not gonna pretend that I'm not gonna put this back on and be like, whoa, look at that, because I can't do that authentically. But look at this. Right on the edge of our bison farm, we have a horn just sitting in the woods. This is gonna be an heirloom piece of memorabilia. I have a lot of great memories of that first night. There was just so much potential for both me and the property, and I was really eager to just jump into it and get things done. I hadn't run into any major hurdles yet. I was making a real concerted effort to not be afraid of any process I didn't know how to do. Every tree I cut down, every stump I pulled, every log cut into firewood was a step closer to where I wanted to be. It was all right out in the open and all super tangible. But that part of the process didn't last long.
I've been putting a lot of work into the back of the property, but I think my work would be better spent up here.
It was only a day or two before I had my first encounter with my new neighbors, who banned me outright from using the road that ran between our properties. And while they were within their right to do so, it is their road legally. The reasoning they gave was pretty weak.
Well, this is the day's pile, and over there is the day's other pile. We've gotten quite a bit of work done today, and all the way down there is where we will start tomorrow.
I also needed to set up somewhere to sleep and store my stuff during this part of the process. As you can imagine, I was getting pretty tired of being crammed in my car with most of my earthly belongings, so getting these out and put away, cleaning my car, and putting everything in order was a big priority.
Sweet. Mostly mosquito-less. Silence.
That one.
Basically everything has been moved in. I'm surrounded by things on all sides, and the filth wagon is freed once more, albeit very, very dusty.
We got cheese, we got more cheese, we got butter, we got jam, we got bacon. I think there's something below the bacon. There's nothing below the bacon. That is most everything you need. Looks like the bacon's done. Absolutely scrumptious.
Breakfast isn't exactly as cozy as I thought it would be, or hoped, because I don't really have everything set up for a big breakfast like this yet, but it's exactly what I needed. I've also been working on our horn from earlier. I've spent some time cleaning it up, getting it all shiny, and I put a hole in the end. So with the addition of a simple reed, it becomes a war horn. Now, with my war horn, I officially christen this land as my own. With that out of the way, it was time to get back to work on the driveway. I was making great progress and everything was already getting more cleaned up and open looking, which was good because it had to be pretty clean and open for the gravel people to be able to come through and do what they had to do. It was a really sore financial blow that early on, but it was super necessary to have somewhere off the road to park, stage materials, and just sort of anchor myself in, so well worth it. And it was a good opportunity to just put on some headphones, listen to a new album, and just sink myself into the process, because everything that I've ever done here has just been one long, never-ending process. It was better to get used to it then. The next day I got to work cutting in a path where the cabin was actually going to be, which was a much less tedious process and very quickly got me to a part of the property that was much more out of the way. It took me maybe a good 4 hours or so, but at that time it was about midsummer, and I had just about as much daylight as I could want to work with, so it only made sense to work through another night and get things looking a little bit cleaner. This was a long time before I started any gravel or stonework, but I wanted to hem in my path a bit and give it some kind of border. So I spent the night pulling up big pillows of moss from out-of-the-way spots and lining the whole length of the path with it, which went a long way in making everything look a bit more lush and tidy. It was a really solid long-term investment too, because to this day, all the moss I put down back then is well-rooted and doing just fine. But of course, all that was secondary to clearing out the actual build site, which I spent all of the next day doing. The amount that I cleared is a far cry from what I have opened up now, but it was more than enough space to get started working on the foundation of the cabin. I also made a little friend here. and I named him Cornelius. I don't know if I ever said that in the original video, but he just hung out with me for a while, and I miss him dearly. I hope he's doing well. A few days after that, and an embarrassing amount of procrastination later, I finally had my very first lumber shipment, delivered to my driveway and ready to go. All I needed to do was cut everything loose and carry it piece by slow piece all the way over to the build site. Now, I was a poor student in general, and I was a terrible math student. I actually cannot comprehend math, and lining out a foundation involves a little bit of trigonometry, which is something I am not very good at, or at least wasn't very good at until my dad came down and lined me out on the first part of this foundation. It's more intuitive than it seems, and getting everything square is just a matter of time and slow effort. But fortunately for me, it is the only high school math thing that has ever come up in my life, and I'm pretty sure that's just about it. And beyond that, there's nothing more about a build like this that's actually very complicated at all. You can wing this. It's not going to be perfect, the tradesmen are going to yell at you, but it's much better to just jump into it and figure it out as you go. I promise you will learn so much that way. I mean, don't get me wrong, take all the help that you can get, because I would have saved a lot of time and money if I had listened to a little bit more advice. But at the same time, I am very glad that I just jumped into it and did it myself. I think that people are really lacking that in the modern day, and I'm never going to make anything into a generation thing, because I think that generational hate is stupid. I think this is an everyone problem, is that people are just afraid of unfamiliar processes, and cultivating the skill of just jumping into something, whether or not it's exactly right, and being able to figure it out and trusting yourself to make the decision even if it's the wrong one, and then fixing that, is a very valuable skill that I would not have otherwise. Once you have your four corners square and level, it's not a very difficult process as far as actual brain work, but digging these holes was an absolute nightmare, because my entire property is just gravel. Just from the bottom up, it's just like a tiny layer of topsoil on the top, and then just stones the whole way down. The amount of time I spent in the heat digging these holes was just barbaric. It was awful. That's one of the main things that keeps me from making new buildings, is having to dig the holes and make the foundation. But once it was done, the rest of it went together very smoothly. All I had to do was cut out my floor joists, slot them into place, and nail everything together. And there isn't much of anything fun about doing a foundation, but slotting all of these into place was really satisfying. And it marked the end of the more tedious section of building the foundation. And with that done, I called up a couple of my friends for some good old-fashioned unpaid labor.
Gandhi, do you want to tell us what you did over there? Let's take a look at it.
Ooh. That's horrible. Quality, is it? Oh, look at that. That's beautiful.
That is flush. Good. Mugger, not ours. Sponsored? Sponsored? Daniel, don't. Yes, I am ready. Do it, friend. Very nice. Three, 2, 1. And yeah, that wasn't as cool as it could have been. But look at that. Yeah. Yeah. We will cover up everything.
With these guys helping out, we finished the last work on the foundation in a single night, and cannot tell you how wonderful it was to just see this ready to go, clean and finished, and real tangible proof that I was making progress. So it wasn't long before I wanted to get the rest of my friends together to really bump it up a notch and start framing up the walls and the roof. Now, something to note here, we started framing the cabin on August 5th, which is almost exactly 2 months after I got here. I don't know what I was doing with all that time. I wasted a lot of time that first summer just not knowing how to quite start anything. But that's fine because eventually I did get around to it, and when I did, I figured it all out. Jacob here, the guy I panned to in this shot, was probably our most valuable asset that day by a long shot. I usually go for unpaid labor if I can get away with it, but these guys made a long drive down from Salcha to come help me out, so I did pay them for their time and labor, as much as I could afford. Jacob got a little extra bonus from me because he was the only one of us who had ever actually built a structure before. All the rest of us were just winging it, figuring it out as we go. So he was in charge of making sure that my walls were actually structurally sound. And a couple years later, I think he did a pretty good job. Thank you, Jacob. I appreciate you. He did mess up the dimensions of the kitchen window that he was in charge of, but that was a quick fix, and nothing egregious. Not nearly as egregious as the audio that I'm about to play for you. I am so sorry.
Say that again. Say it to my face.
I said, I need to get some film of this monstrosity.
Not a monstrosity, it's gonna rotate.
This is the most Calvin and Hobbes looking.
Yeah, it's so you can walk on it. Yeah, Calvin and Hobbes looking is a good thing.
As unlistenable as most of this old audio is, I just couldn't leave out the creation of the Calvin and Hobbes ladder. It's an heirloom of my land. It's rickety, it's dangerous, it's poorly built, and I use it all the time. I still have it, and I still use it like almost every time I need a ladder. It is my go-to. It very well may be the greatest thing Ian has ever made, and I am almost certain he would agree with me. But it didn't get too much use while we were putting everything together, mostly because the only thing we could have used it for was getting onto the roof, and Ian is the only one who was doing that, and being that he's a bit of a little rodent vermin creature, he had no problem scurrying up there on his own. Once we got the front and back walls on, we started on putting up the roof trusses and framing everything up nice and level and sturdy. Looking back, I'm honestly really surprised how much work we actually managed to get done. Each of us kind of had our own thing going on, and we were just passing tools back and forth and making some really, really good progress. And at the end of the day, we had put in about 5 hours of good, hard work. And the next day, everybody came back to finish up the job. We really didn't do a bad job on day one, but on day two, we all had a much better idea of what needed to be done and who needed to do it. And it didn't take long at all for us to get into a very productive sort of fugue state. Jacob got to work on figuring out the end walls while Ian scurried on up to the roof. But, of course, it was too good to last.
Spung. S-P-U-N-G. There's probably an E on the end. Spung.
It is. That is
It's
lovely.
nice if I'm not moving. This is a really nice ambient temperature. But if I have to do some activity.
Well, there's a nice breeze now. It's pretty great.
That's true.
But after our quick break, it was time to take the very important step of installing an interior door with no insulation, opening outwards, enthusiastically onto the front of the door.
Not carpenters. No more feeling.
All right. Let me get 3, 2, 1. Ah, it didn't latch.
Let's just let the wind do it.
Okay.
A
Nope.
little harder than
Real attempt. 3, 2, 1.
Yeah!
Woo! I need. Who's got? Oh!
Do you feel safe? Yeah, I feel safe.
That looks way better. Honestly, genuinely.
the ladder while you're on it.
He's making it more sturdy while you're there.
Actually, I can feel it solidifying. I ate a mosquito.
Around this time, we kind of divvied ourselves into two teams. Me, Condi, and Brendan worked on cutting all the panels for the exterior walls, while Ian and Jacob worked on putting on the roof. But we were still making some pretty good progress, so I headed on up to give them a hand, because I really just wanted an excuse to be up in the open air.
Blood, sweat, and tears.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's a lot of blood.
Blood, sweat, and tears.
There's
dude.
a lot more
Look
blood
at the grime
than.
on my nails. Yeah, there's a lot more blood than sweat or
Dang.
tears. The breeze is keeping the sweat down.
Oh, that's lovely.
Not like a hemorrhaging. I just get offended.
Not like
I have my
hemorrhaging.
first aid kit, but it's like a walk, and I'd rather just bleed.
Good job.
We got the last of the sheet metal nice and solid, finished up the back wall, and we were just about ready to call it a night. We had gotten a ton of work done, and in just a couple of days, I went from almost nothing here to the bones of a very real building. And to this day, the couple days that we spent building this together are some of my fondest that I have made here since I got back. But I didn't get to keep all that help forever. The next day, everybody went home, and I was back on my own again. Truly back on my own, because somehow I had lost my car keys for like 3 or 4 days at this point, and I was basically stuck at the property. So I was basically stuck here for a couple of days with whatever food I happened to have laying around, which was basically bread, a jar of peanut butter, and some little squeezy applesauce packets that somebody had given me. It wasn't much, but it was enough. It was beautiful weather, and I was really looking forward to just getting some stuff done. With the skeleton of the cabin finished, all I really had to do was put on the exterior walls, insulate everything, and then get started on the tongue and groove internally, which is much, much easier said than done, but none of it was very difficult work. I had already ordered all the lumber that I was going to need, so progress came very, very quickly. And it was nice to just lock in for a while and just enjoy my own company. I had music, I had podcasts left over from the drive up, and I just let all that run in the background while I cut, nailed, and put everything together. It was kind of a drab, lonely couple days out here by myself, but I did get a lot done, and I really had to make up for lost time. Again, I don't know what happened at all to the first 2 months that I was here. I was very afraid of messing something up and wasting a lot of money, and I just let that get in my way, which is something that I don't do anymore. I just procrastinate normally. I know exactly what I need to do, and I don't do it. But back then, it was just about not knowing what needed to be done. But minute by minute, panel by panel, I forced myself to put everything together, and within a couple of days, I was getting very close to having the entire structure fully enclosed on all sides. After about 3 days out here by myself, I finally did end up finding my car keys and made myself mobile again. The cabin had come a long way in that time, and I was ready to move on to some new steps to the process. I brought Brendan over again to work on the electrical because he took a class on it, and Condi, with one of her many unique skill sets, had other business to attend to.
I'm gonna rescue the baby mice that gave birth in your tent.
Yeah, they did do that.
Alright, where are they?
They're in this box here. Lift the top box. Oh,
did
sit
you
there.
lock them in?
Nope, there's Mother Cornelius right there. She's gonna come out of your fingers.
Hey, Mama. Hi. Okay, we'll do your
grab her?
business first.
Unless she ate all of them. Well, they did destroy that shirt. That's fine.
We're gonna put you in there.
That's not Mama. That's a baby.
clown.
Look, that's a healthy baby.
It's tiny. Yeah, they're mouse babies.
They're gonna be like that for a bit. They'll get cuter, I promise.
Yeah.
Once the babies had been relocated, Condi stuck around for a bit to help me out with one of the next big milestones in the building process, our very first window.
Oh! Mickey, you could have told me there was good. Oh. Where do you want it? Here? Right. This is the worst way to do it!
What was a better one?
You get one side, I get the other side. No, I get the top and you get the bottom.
Probably. Look at that. That's a window in my house.
For the record, everyone, I'm aware that we put in the window upside down, but compared to this, I don't think it's really that much of a problem.
I know. What the hell is that?
But cutting some new pieces and fixing that window really wasn't that much of a hassle, and once it was in, all I really had to do left for the exterior was put on one more big piece of T111 on the front right beside the door, and on the inside, I could work on the insulation. To take a short break from that, I cut out the very last piece of T111 I was going to need and got it put up, which means that I finally had a fully enclosed cabin. All that I really needed to do now was fill out the rest of the insulation and get started on the tongue and groove. Now, I've said a lot of bad things about tongue and groove in the past. I don't mean any of them. It's classy, it looks great, it's kind of expensive, and that's probably one of the more bad things about it, but really my problem with it is doing a tongue and groove ceiling, because if you're doing 16-foot boards like I was, fully by yourself, it's basically impossible. It's awful. There's a reason it took like 2.5 years. I beg of you, do absolutely anything else for the ceiling, or at very least get yourself a friend who is willing to help you and to suffer. But if you're just gonna do walls, go for it, because all of the walls I got done in maybe a couple of days. It took basically no time at all. It was super, super clean and easy to put together, and that's really what tongue and groove is all about. And it just looks so good. I didn't even stain anything, actually. It's all just exposed wood to this day, and I've never had any problems with it. But man, I just had to get out of there and do something else. And fortunately for me, I had just the thing to go occupy my time with, because my parents have a piece of property a couple miles down the road, maybe like 10-15 miles from the cabin or so. And on that piece of property is this weird concrete bunker thing that had a very old run-down wood stove in it that they weren't going to use. So they just let me have that, which is wonderful because stoves are so expensive. It would be a little bit before I actually went and installed it, but at least I have it on hand and ready to go. But until then, I just wanted to enjoy something very, very magical. This was the very first time I ever turned on any sort of light in my cabin, and I just wanted to get everything nice and cleaned up. That night, I actually slept in here for the very first time, just on the hardwood floor in a sleeping bag, after I got everything all tidied up, and it was finally beginning to feel less like a construction site and more like a place that I could actually call home. And I even proved it by getting myself a little doormat, because what else do fully functioning adults buy for themselves except for doormats and lumber, I guess. Granted, there were a lot of bugs and butterflies in here on that first night, and a lot of mosquitoes as well, but I slept very content, which is what a couple long days of building will do to a person. The next morning, I woke up and had a tiny, terrible little hobo breakfast on the floor and used my butane burner for the very first time, which you can tell because of the way I flinched away from it when it lit. It's been a long time since I've done that. It was just ramen and a really terrible attempt to make coffee using paper towels instead of actual coffee filters, which didn't work at all. But really, I just needed to throw something into my system to keep me alive while I went into town to grab some of the things that I would need to fully furnish the inside of my cabin. Well, not fully furnished, it wasn't even close to done at this point, and it was only this spring that I actually finished everything entirely, but this was a good step in the right direction. Some of the comforts of home that I had been missing for a long time while I've been living in tents and on the floor and at one of my friends' houses. I've gone fully no penny to my name broke about 4 times since I moved out here and started living this life, so I'm very, very good at saving my money nowadays. But that being said, it did feel really wonderful to just take a shopping spree for myself and grab some of the things that would turn my cabin into much more of a place that I would actually want to live. This is another night I look back on really fondly, not because anything big or major happened, but because I was just very content. I had all this stuff and I basically spent the entire night watching movies and assembling furniture and putting it all into place, and I could finally get to see a sort of vision of how my home was actually going to look. I was just excited to have a place that I could really mold into a reflection of myself and turn into a space that was built expressly for me. But before I could get any further into that, I went with Ian into Fairbanks to get some more tongue and groove to fill out the inside of my cabin walls.
Ian, you want to let us know what we're doing? That was a lot. That was really impressive, actually.
I know, I've been saying about going to town, getting material, and a couch.
Awesome. Yep. That is what we're doing. Didn't you say that was your coffee cup?
Yeah, it is. I'll just wipe it out later.
What are you looking for, Ian?
Mugs.
Mug. We're getting mugs.
Very nice. There we go. Very nice.
I really need a world's best grandpa mug, though. I will not leave without one.
Oh, sweaty. I need to get AC in here.
Just started filming, man. It's gonna go in now.
I'm okay with a couple minutes.
Yeah. It's going in now.
It's really hot in here.
It's not that hot.
I'm warm. I run toasty.
After another day or so of cutting and dealing with the hassle of doing tongue and groove around a window, I had nearly finished my 3rd wall, but I did have a few really rough cuts just around the window that I wanted to clean up. So I went into town, grabbed myself a little bit of heavy grit sandpaper and a trusty old hand planer. After finishing that up inside, I had a very big project waiting for me just outside of my front door. When I cut in everything through here, I just made a huge stack of all of the aspens that I had cut down that would eventually need to be turned into firewood, and there were a lot of them, and they were all at just about the right size that they were very difficult to hit with the splitting maul, and it took a bit of time. It was good to get some nice rugged exercise in, but it was definitely not something that I was going to be able to get done in one night. So after a while, I moved on to clearing out some more space in the front of my property, because one of the things that I really wanted from the very beginning was a nice big fire pit to enjoy by myself and with all of my friends. Because I mean, the scenery is great out here, and there are a few things I love more than a good excuse to start a fire. But more pressing than that, I had a ton of scrap, whether it be just stuff that I cut down or lumber offcuts that needed to get burned. So I grabbed whatever dry stuff was laying around, which was very abundant because, you know, late summer in Alaska, and got a nice hearty blaze going just as it was starting to rain. Oh, while we're sitting around the fire, I've got a hot take for you all, and I mean this to everyone from oldest, gnarliest blue-collar builder to somebody who is just starting today. Guys, it's okay to get rid of lumber and offshoots that you're not gonna use, because man, the amount of people who just have things just piled up in some little corner, or just getting rained on, with the vague idea that someday I might be able to use some of this, Guys, 99% of the time that just ends up being unusable clutter after a couple years, and if you don't have something in mind, just get rid of it. I don't know, maybe I'm really biased here, I just like to have things really tidy, and I can't stand the idea of just having a big pile of wood laying around, waiting for me to give it some new purpose. Once you spend enough time living in a construction site, you get to a point where all you're really craving is just some semblance of order and just having everything in its place. I don't know, maybe that's just me. But being able to burn a bunch of stuff and having all this opened out and giving myself a little bit more space to move around really helped me out, and I'm very glad I did it. A little while later, I was really getting into the beginning of fall, which was kind of an eye-opener and really showed me how much time I actually had left to deal with. So I got right back to it and did a little bit more clearing out in the front, but more so, honestly, to get a little bit more wood. I was definitely going to have to buy some wood from somebody, something a lot less green and probably aged and split a little bit, but having the aspen here was a very good start. It was just getting to the point where it was cold enough that I would want a fire inside, and I was gathering up some of the drier stuff I had on hand to be cut and ready for when I actually had my wood stove installed, which I would do very, very soon. But it was a process that I wasn't exactly sure on, so I was really doing a whole lot of stalling. So I spent a lot of time over those couple days raking and cleaning everything up and stacking all of the wood that I already had cut. Just basically anything to keep myself from having to figure out how to cut a hole in my wall, because that just made me really, really uncomfortable, because if I mess that up, it's a hole in my wall, and it's gonna be like that for a long, long while. But eventually I had to suck it up, grab the last hung groove that I need, and start figuring out how to put everything together. But as usual, the task itself actually wasn't very difficult, and I just needed to get out of my own head and get to work. Fortunately for me, the insulated tube that goes into the wall itself was actually a gift from my dad. He had picked it up, I think, at the dump a couple of years ago, and since he didn't have a use for it, he just let me have it, which saved me quite a bit of money, and I got it slotted in very quickly with very little effort. I did unfortunately end up grabbing the wrong kind of stovepipe for the inside. The one I'm using here is a galvanized stovepipe that you're supposed to put on the outside because, I mean, if you put it inside, it'll just burn off all of its coating and then just fill your house with poisonous fumes, but I didn't use it for too long before I actually switched it out with something that you're actually supposed to use, so it really was no problem. But once I got the chimney installed, all I needed to do was give my stove a quick cleanup with a little bit of sandpaper, some water, and some paper towels, and I could finally have my very first fire in the cabin. It was about mid-September when I finally got this done, and I gotta say, I think I got it all together at exactly the right time. That's around the time when we actually start getting a little bit chilly at night, and it was good to have a way to keep myself warm and toasty. Just after I installed the wood stove, I did end up getting that nice dry wood delivered. It was a bit spendy, of course, but it was really, really necessary, and I got to enjoy the last couple days of autumn splitting firewood in beautiful, beautiful weather before we got our very first snow of the winter. A lot of people in Alaska seem to really dread winter, which I kind of don't understand, because it's easy to be afraid of the cold when you're not in it, but the second it starts getting into the 30s and then the 20s every day, you acclimate very quickly. And honestly, I think I was just happy for a change of scenery. You can't deny that the falling snow is an incredible vibe, and it was lovely to be out there and just chop the very last of my wood and enjoy the beauty of the new season. And speaking of beauty, Before it got too cold to do any more projects outside, one of the big things that I wanted to do was put some kind of siding and wind barrier on the sides of the house because it looks terrible. It looked terrible up until I put anything up on the sides. Before I gave it any kind of siding. It really was a shack for a really long time, and I was very eager to change that. So I went out in probably mid-November and spent a day or so stapling this Tyvek around the sides of the cabin, so that afterward I could cut some siding and put it into place. I had everything I would need delivered the next morning, because there's no way I could have gotten this stuff myself. It's like 16 feet long, it's really heavy, and while it sucked to have to spend the $75 to get it delivered, it was well worth it, I think, and I think you'll agree, because the difference this made after just an hour or two of effort is really, really impressive. And as a nice little bonus, because I was doing the siding that was going to be going up against the windows and the door, I was going to have to trim up all of the edges, and that really, really brought everything together. I don't mind detail work, but on a cabin like this, it's kind of never-ending and very expensive, but when it's actually done, my goodness, it makes such a difference. It would be a long, long time before I finished the back wall of the cabin, because it's the part of the cabin that isn't on camera nearly as much, and this stuff is pretty expensive. I worked on both the window and the door side and got everything looking much, much nicer. One really necessary thing that I did was I got the gable trim that I would need to put over the edges of the top of the roof and really seal in the top outside part of the cabin. Although at this point I did still have the entirely uninsulated holes in the front that was just dumping all of my firewood heat out into the open air, but that's a problem for another day. But almost everything I did here was very, very much aesthetic things. And while the siding does give me a tiny bit more insulation, it's really not enough to say that it's actually any practical part of the cabin. But for the very first time, I looked at this in the snow and in the sunset, and I thought that my cabin looked beautiful. But unfortunately, back in 2023, that was about as far as I could go. The cabin was not even close to being fully finished and ready for the winter, and I was getting really, really miserable, especially with the tongue and groove, because the top of the roof was very open in the front and it was always freezing in there. I would wake up to maybe 10 degrees and then I couldn't even get a fire started because all of my wood was so wet. It was kind of a nightmare, and a nightmare of my own making too, which is why I needed to figure out something to do with myself while the winter lasted. This is also just before my car abruptly died on me, fully, like, unfixable died on me, and then I had a second car do the exact same thing less than a week later. So around this time, for quite a while, I got fully immobilized. I ended up staying at a $200 a month rental cabin that just had lights, electricity, and a Toyo stove. When I made the original video about this, I think a lot of people who watched it just didn't listen to what I was saying, because I made it very clear back then that I wasn't giving up. I just needed to get out of there for a while and figure out something else to do with myself until spring. The actual rental cabin that I ended up getting was about 15 miles away from my land. It was not far away, and it wasn't a much easier winter there than it would have been in my cabin. I think I made the decision to leave around mid to late November, and once I got in touch with my friend's dad who runs all of these and was moved in basically 1 or 2 days later. And fortunately for me, he even gave me a little discount, which was very, very nice of him. And I really can't tell you how wonderful it was to walk into a beautiful, finished little building and be able to press a button that just turns on electric heat. That was wonderful. And honestly, once I settled into this place, I really, really loved it there. It wasn't ideal. I wish I could have spent that first winter in my own cabin, but it was a really beautiful spot to think and sort of get my life situated and figured out. So I left my cabin almost exactly as it was. I couldn't hardly stand to be there at the time, and after a little less than a week of grabbing all the things that I would need for the winter, I settled in and I waited for spring, which was a long time coming, obviously, but I needed to decompress and really figure out what I was going to do when in March I got the opportunity to try again. A few months later, when it was finally starting to warm up, I left the rental cabin and headed back over to the property to start getting my life back in order. I had left it pretty much untouched, and it was a mess the last couple days that I was there, and it seemed pretty abandoned, honestly, when I got back, but I was more than eager to jump back into the process of getting things cleaned up and starting the new year on a much better foot. But it was going to take a lot of effort. I mean, even just to dig myself into all this packed snow and get myself off the road took probably an hour or two, and once I finally drove in, I couldn't really open my door and really had to struggle to get out of my car, but I could make my way over to the wreckage. It was a pretty sore sight to walk in and see everything all disheveled and terrible and covered in garbage. And these kind of environments are made a lot worse when it's cold, but all I needed to do was get a fire going and start the long process of getting everything cleaned up, and this place would feel a lot more like home. So that's exactly what I did. After an hour or so, everything had cleaned up very nicely, and by this point in time, it was about late March, and we were starting to get some really nice days outside. So I wanted to start small and get back into it by working on some of the trim around the windows that needed to be done inside. I went and bought some new lumber and started pulling things out of the snow that I would need to get this done. Fortunately, all I really needed to grab was these sawhorses. A lot of things got left under the snow over the winter, which is something I'm going to have to deal with very soon. But that's a problem for when the snow thawed. Well, mostly a problem for when the snow thawed. One of the things that I absolutely needed was my generator, but I couldn't get it to run after, being outside for the entire winter. The problem fixed itself after I brought it inside for a while to heat up, but in the meantime, I got myself a nice little handsaw and got to work. Everything actually came together really quickly, and it was a very nice warm-up. It really cleaned up this window, and after that, me and Ian went back into town because he's the only guy I know who has a truck and enough time to help me out, and I grabbed a cabinet and countertop for what would eventually become, I guess, my kitchen area? I don't know. It's got a sink, but I've never had any kind of water hooked up to it or anything. I mean, I've got a blue jug. That's pretty cool, I guess. I just store a bunch of stuff in it actually, but it's really just to fill out the side of the cabin and turn it into a bit more than a giant empty wall. Cutting out the hole for the sink basin took a bit of time, but it was actually one of the most beautiful days of the year so far when I started that. It was probably 45 degrees outside that day, and we were really losing a lot of snow at that point. I got it done, brought it inside, and got everything cleaned up so I could admire my new piece of furniture. And look at how nice that looks. It was a good step in the right direction for filling out this part of the cabin, but then I had to turn my attention back to other matters. A few weeks after this, almost all the snow was gone, and I could really start the bulk of the spring cleaning, which was a lot of work because I left so much stuff out in the snow over the winter. It's kind of insane. It was honestly really helpful for just cataloging all of the tools that I had lost because I found probably like 10 or 12 different things that were just out in the snow that I could put all in one spot and finally get organized. One of the biggest things to deal with was all the firewood that I bought last year because, I got everything that I would need for a winter, but then I had to put it all over to the cabin armload by armload, and doing that was basically most of the work that I got done. And on top of that, there was still all of the little aspen cuts that I had made last year just laying around. So over the next couple days, I spent a couple days and nights cutting all that by hand and getting it all stacked up. Around this time, I also got a visit from our bison that actually live in the field right in front of me, which is a really wonderful addition to the view when they show up like once or twice a year. But in the meantime, I got the last of my wood cut and stacked, and I could move on to cleaning up the front of the cabin, which I was really looking forward to because when I was doing the roof in the winter for the first time, I just couldn't make the 16-footers work, so for a while I tried doing a sort of staggered tongue and groove with like 2 8-foot pieces and then 6 and 4-foot pieces, but it all got really detached from itself and warped, and I just tore the whole thing down at one point. And I ended up dumping all of those just right out the door and thought to myself, I can fix this in the spring. And I did by burning it, of course. And there was a lot of other things that needed to get burned as well. For everything laying around that could be burned, there was probably just as much that had to be packed up and thrown away. One of the big things of which was all this insulation that got left out over the winter and was just soaked and unusable, and I had to pack it all up with all the other garbage and get rid of it. But all in all, I was making some really good progress, and I was so happy with seeing how my place could look if everything was actually all raked up, cleaned, organized, and free of trash. One of the big things that I really have always strived for with this property, at least when I could and when it wasn't a build site, is to make sure that it doesn't look like just every other in the middle of nowhere Alaskan shack homestead that just has junk everywhere and everything is disheveled. I want this place to look clean, and one of the big things that I wanted to do in order to do that was clean up my path a little bit. I got a tip from the one neighbor that I actually talked to that there's a place somewhere nearby where you can go load yourself up on gravel, which is exactly what I did because I wanted to gravel everything. It's a little bit of a drive, but I think it's worth it. I'm not sure if you can actually get gravel delivered to your place in at least semi-small amounts around here. I've looked around to see if I can source somebody to bring me large stones, and I haven't had any luck with that. So for now, I'm just gonna do this by hand. And for the last time, everyone, I'm never gonna get a wheelbarrow. I'm not gonna do it. I'm not gonna let anyone else pay for it either. I don't need it. I like carrying the buckets. Makes me feel good about myself. I get a lot of work done. This absolutely destroyed empty nail bucket that I've had for a few years is all I'm ever gonna need. This is the way I want to live. After a couple days of work and probably like 8 gravel runs, I was getting pretty close to having the entire path done. And after cutting down and digging out one of these little elevated spots, really pushed up with some thick roots, I got the last of it done and got ready to start on putting some kind of little porch onto my front door. Another decision that I made just because everyone else was complaining about it. I personally never minded the 1.5, 2 foot jump that it took to get up to the door, and I would always joke with people that it was to keep the elderly out of my house. But it couldn't last forever. I really did need something that would ease the transition between the ground and my cabin, and this was just about what I needed. Although I didn't actually end up building the stairs that were supposed to go with this, just because I couldn't be bothered at that point, and lumber is still, as always, quite expensive. And fortunately for me, I did just get given a very perfect set of stairs that I just put up next to these a couple months ago. I mean, it was like this for more than a year, but the stairs that I was given are kind of perfect, and I'm super glad that I didn't have to do that myself. The process went about as smooth as it builds. If you're making something... By this time we were really getting into the height of summer, and it was just gorgeous every day. Well, it got way too hot around midday, but I didn't start at midday because that's barbaric. I would get up at about 4 to 6 in the morning, and it was just the right temperature to get started on whatever projects I had to do. One of which was graveling out the front of the cabin because I wanted this to be a bit nicer than just this giant patch of dirt that it had been basically since I cleared it out. And speaking of cleaning things up, I really wanted to make my fire pit look a bit nicer, so I'd been gathering these big flat stones for maybe a couple weeks with the intent of digging this up and making a nice little ring around it that would really clean everything up. And this ethos kind of extended to basically the entire property. I had a lot more gravel work that I wanted to do. I wanted to clean out behind the cabin and get everything just looking as nice as I could get it, and basically anything that I could do other than actually finishing the interior, because the tongue and groove on the ceiling was still killing me. Every single time I attempted it, it just would not work, and the trim around the edges was just about as bad. But out here, I could make some pretty easy, tangible progress, and I could justify it to myself by saying that this will make all my thumbnails look a lot better. So for a long while, I just picked up all the little pieces of busy work that I could find that would get me closer and closer to having an actual nice place to live. But one of the big problems I was running into was I just had too much stuff. I mean, that's probably a problem that most people have, but even me being somebody who fit everything that I had in my car like a year ago, I just had too much stuff. I had all these tools that I didn't have anywhere to put, and I didn't want to just store everything under my cabin. That seemed like a messy kind of cop-out method to deal with that, and I just didn't want to do it. So I did some scheming and devising, and I decided that the only real way to deal with this was to get myself some nice storage space. And since building videos had done very well in the past, I figured I needed to kind of get another one of those cooking. So I decided that my next project had to be some kind of storage shed. So I started clearing out the whole area where I wanted it to go and burning everything that needed to be burned. I had ordered maybe another $1,500 worth of lumber, and while I waited for that to arrive, I started spacing out and digging all of my post holes. If I had known what this place would eventually become, I probably would have put a lot more effort into it in the beginning, but this one I was very content to make just an actual shack, just anything to get all of my stuff out of the rain and put away. Funnily enough, I got started on this project almost exactly 1 year after me and all my friends had framed up my cabin. So it was good to get started on another project and be doing this one on my own. By this point in time, I was much more confident with myself and my abilities as a builder. I was thinking about this a while ago. I just had an epiphany one day where I was like, oh dang, I'm a carpenter. Like, I have all these carpenter skills that I kind of gained accidentally, but I have them now. Around this time is when I was finally beginning to feel that manifest in my life as I was doing things. I wasn't afraid to just jump into the process and figure it out as I go, and I kind of knew innately now how to frame buildings and what was actually involved in that process. It's something that's not nearly as difficult as it looks once you know anything about it, and fortunately for me, there is no sort of permits or building codes that I have to follow because the great state of Alaska is a beautiful place that works like it should. No one should be able to tell me what or how I need to build things on my own land. He done its best to make building as uncomfortable as possible. By the time I finished the foundation, autumn was coming in again, and I was once again on a timer counting down to winter. Fortunately for me, the rest of the lumber I would need was delivered just a few days after, and I could get started putting everything together. few weeks later, I had made some good enough progress, but it probably wasn't as much as I could have done, and I was really getting into crunch time as winter was just around the corner. So I think this night I had just gotten back from a trip to Valdez with my dad, and I'd gotten a bunch of energy drinks, coffee, and like a 5-hour energy, and was just cruising through the night to get as much done possible in one day as I could. I was mostly just building up the walls, but eventually I was going to have to deal with the roof as well. I would end up having to do this roof like 3 times, probably because of how badly I did it the first time. I didn't use the right screws, it could have been much sturdier, and I really just half-assed this construction. But in my defense at the time, I really just did want something that I could put all my junk in and get it all out of the way. It didn't need to be anything special. And honestly, I was probably about due for some karma in regards to how haphazard a lot of my building things are, because people want to make you think that there's a precise, exact way to do a lot of this stuff. I promise that it's not that rigid. You can figure out a lot of different ways to get to different things. I didn't put as much work into this as I should have, and I paid the price for that when we got our freak storm in January that ripped the roof right off this thing. And I'm kind of glad that that happened, because I didn't really have to do much work on the roof when it was done for the cabin itself, because that was mostly Jacob and Ian. And it was just a part of the process I was afraid of, so I let them take the reins on it. Which meant that I didn't really know how to do it super well myself. I sure do now, because I've done it like 3 times, and that was probably very good for me. After a frankly obscene amount of procrastinating, I finished just about as much as I was going to get done with this that year. That was probably just about a year ago now when we were really settling into winter, about late October or so, and I got everything cleaned out on the inside and started moving stuff in. That meant everything from around the property, everything under the cabin and the shed, every tool, everything that was in the snow. I gathered it all up, organized it, and put it away, and it felt so good. And that was kind of the last thing I did for the year. I think most of the videos I did after this were stuff I did with my friends and some of the trips I went on, but after that I ended up going home to Michigan for Thanksgiving through Christmas, and I got back early in the new year, ready to get back to business. I came back into a really weird pocket of weather where we got like some 50-degree days in January, but right after that it sank right back down into the negative 20s and 30s, and as cold as it was, it really did feel like home. As always, it's a good bit of work just to get myself anchored back in. I spent some time clearing out my driveway, getting my car all cleaned up, and I got right back into business. I had figured before I left that once I got back, I would try and get my rental cabin back again for the winter, but I couldn't let that happen forever. So one of the first things I wanted to do was get the stuff that I needed to actually finish the interior of the cabin. And while I was at it, Ian and I found a guy on Marketplace who was willing to sell a bunch of this kind of terrible wet wood for incredibly cheap. I think it was $75 for as much wood as you were able to put into your vehicle, which is really insane up here. And I mean, all of it was super wet and green, but it would dry out over the next year or so, and it would be really quality stuff. Once we got back to my place and Ian headed out, I got to work on cutting, chopping, and stacking all of the new wood that we had gotten. And at the same time, I brought over all the trim boards I had picked up at the Home Depot in Fairbanks and got started on finishing up the inside of the cabin. It's not super difficult work, but very, very tedious. There were a lot of cuts on the walls that I actually had to take down and cut again to fix, because somehow I'd gotten the angle for the end walls going up to the ceiling a bit off, and I had to redo a couple of those, but that wasn't too bad. After that, I spray foamed in everything to really seal up all these cracks, and then I put these trim boards over it. I call them trim boards, but they're the best looking bundles of the 1x3s that you can get at Home Depot that I could find. But they're much cheaper and they work just as well. But I was making too much progress too fast, and because of karma, it was just about time for us to get a almost record-breaking windstorm. With 100-mile-an-hour winds, I got another new problem hand-delivered to my door.
Where's my roof? These middle trusses are completely gone. And to add just a little bit of salt to the wound, little insult to injury, it also decided to snow for the first time in weeks, the second the roof was gone. So that's just another fun thing I'll have to deal with.
See, these two got off easy. They just fell right behind the place. The real problem is over there. Whew. Oh my. I was under the impression there would be more of these.
I didn't even show where some of the farthest stuff had gotten, but a couple pieces of the roof tin ended up like 200 feet from the cabin itself, and I spent the rest of the day just finding stuff in the woods that could be salvaged and bringing it back over to the shed and getting it all ready for whatever reconstruction I would be able to figure out. But I didn't do that for too terribly long, because that was one of the coldest nights that we had in a long, long while, and I had to stay up most of the night in about 35 below zero, just keeping the fire going. After that, I got back into it, and I did have a lot to do. To start with, I got rid of the snow that had piled up in the shed over the past couple days, and then I got to work getting all the rest of the stuff that had been thrown about in the woods. There was quite a bit of it that was still usable, but a couple of the pieces of tin were bent into oblivion. They wouldn't have been able to be used again, and quite a few of my boards ended up being fully broken. Altogether, most of the roof construction could be salvaged, but there was about a third of the pieces were broken or damaged in a way that would make them unusable. So I was going to have to go into town and figure out how to get these with just my car. All the pieces I would need were like 10 to 14 feet long, and there's no way I was going to be able to fit them inside, so I was just going to have to do my best to ratchet strap them to the top and hope for the best.
I hate this. I've resorted to going 30 miles an hour for the rest of this journey.
Fortunately, though, I ended up getting home without an issue, but he's home. But I had all the lumber I needed, so I got all my wood unloaded, the trail out to the shed, get started on the rebuilding process. I got back to work. I got a bunch more 1x4s for the beams that would have to go across, but before I could do that, I needed to put the trusses back onto the roof, because all of those were actually pretty much fine. They're much thicker boards than the ones that were above them, and I just needed to find the ones that I had and throw them back up. After that, I just had to cut all the 1x4s that were going to go on top, because I needed them in 14s and they only had 16s. This is one of my least favorite things to do around the property. I've really come to hate roof work, but at the same time, I'm glad again that I did this, because I'm glad again that I made the mistakes the first time and learned how to actually do this properly, because I really half-assed it the first go around, and I had to really learn from those mistakes, because I don't want this roof to ever come off again. And for the most part, I was right. It didn't come off again.
not by itself anyway. A couple months later, I took it off for the third and final time to redo it exactly to my specifications and get it really done well. But that was a long time from then. For now, I was still waiting out the rest of the winter, chopping wood and just trying to make it until the thaw. And it was coming around the corner very quickly. I'd spent enough time working outside for the time being, and I was ready to turn my efforts to the inside of the cabin and really make a final push towards finishing it up. But before I get started, I need to go feed my new friends. And they are very hungry. Oh, he just landed on me. He's on the camera. My friends.
Stop biting. Get out of here.
Stop. Get off my camera, dude. I'm trying to Pavlov him. Every time I feed him, gotta do the... Speak of the devil. Come here. Come here, Tubby. Stop landing on the camera. Come on. Actually, I lied. I remember there was actually a couple more menial tasks outside that I really wanted to finish before I got back to the interior. One of which was putting the siding on the very back wall, which was kind of unnecessary, but it's been on my bucket list forever, and I've actually had the siding pieces to be able to do it for a very long time. I just thought that I hadn't, because when I cut them all for the first time, I somehow cut a couple boards quite a bit too short, which was just strange. I don't know how that ended up happening. And I thought that there was no way to make that work if I was going to stagger them and put a little extra piece on either end, but it ended up working just fine, and I had really nothing to worry about. Everything went up super quickly and easily, and I had just enough siding boards to get the back wall finished. It was a much smoother process than I had hoped for, and after a bit of scrubbing to get the 2 years of dirt off of it, it looked very nice. After finishing that up, I got started on cleaning up my whole area out in front of my house so I could get started on the next big project that really needed to get done, and that is putting insulation in the actual front of the cabin at the top, where it's just been almost open vents for the past couple of years. I've kind of created the perfect vacuum chamber to draw in cold air from under my door and pump hot air out through the top, and that has to end. I mean, it's kind of stupid that I did this now instead of at the beginning of the winter, but it's much better late than never. I kind of had this half-hearted attempt in a couple places to put blocks in the top and sort of seal it off, but I never did as much of that as I needed to, so I just went out of my way to buy an entire new bat of insulation, cut pieces out, and push them into the gaps. And already, even if I had just done nothing else from this point on, this is a huge improvement. It was after this for the very first time that I could leave my cabin for a while after starting a fire, come back, and have it still be relatively warm in there once I returned, and that's just with the insulation in. After that, I cut all these new boards and I put them into the slots on the top. And after spray foaming in all of the edges, I had a very nice tight seal around the entire front of my cabin and really finished up the insulation. With that finished, I could finally go back inside to work on the interior. I'd wanted to get some new furniture and give myself a little bit more storage space, so I looked around on Facebook Marketplace and found a couple things for free. This shelf and another weird little wooden homemade shelf thing. I don't quite know how to describe it, but each of them looked pretty promising, and I figured that if I cleaned them up, they would fit in very nicely. The shelf did great immediately, but since the other thing was going to need some paint work to look at all presentable, I worked on some of the other little decoration things and started really filling out the rest of the trim, because that's one of the things that really brought this place together, and I wanted to make sure that that got done well and quickly. But once I wanted a break from that, I got myself a little bit of paint and started to work on whatever this thing is. I think it was some kind of little homemade wall shelf at some point that people would use for like spices and things in a kitchen, and that's what I figured I would use it for as well. Although my focus here would be tea and whatever little trinkets I could think of that would fit. So I got it as evenly coated as I could, waited for it to dry, and got to work putting it up on the wall. This might actually be one of my favorite additions I've ever made to the cabin. I really just want this place to feel lived in and have a lot of personality, and this really goes a long way in bringing that vision to life. It really fills out the kitchen side of the cabin, gives me a bit more storage space, and all in all, it was a really good move. After that, I picked up a couple pieces of brand new tongue and groove to cut into strips to make the very, very last piece of the interior tongue and groove ceiling, which I had been putting off for about 2 years at this point, and I just could not live with that any longer. And let me tell you, there is nothing manufactured about the joy in this scene.
Yes! Yes! Oh my goodness.
There was a couple other little things that I had to deal with that I had messed up when I had initially done the tongue and groove in this place, but after that was done, it was the very, very last of it. I will never do it for the ceiling again. That was a gigantic problem, but it was finished and over, and I just wanted to take the night to myself, relax, and do a bit of painting, because back then this place was in desperate need of a bit more art and stuff on the walls, and I just wanted to give it a nice little pop of color. So I spent a couple days doing this nice little painting, and I threw it up in an empty corner. You know, it was around this time that my cabin was really beginning to actually feel like home to me, where I was preferring to be here rather than anywhere else, and I was really, really settling in. I mean, I had been somewhat settled in before, but it was actually beginning to feel like it was blossoming in a way. Early 2025 was when a lot of really good things happened here, and this place kind of became beautiful out of nowhere, and that's always something I'm striving for in any space that I'm living in, and this place has really, really come together. And just after I had finished the inside, the outside had just about thawed out enough that I could do another round of spring cleaning and get everything ready for all of the projects of early summer. After a couple days of dialing everything in, getting rid of all the trash and the leaves, I had gotten my place almost as clean as it was going to get up until all of the leaves came in, and I was really ready to get into the next step of development. And by this time, I was just barely recovered from having a couple months off from building projects to be able to jump back into it with some major overhauls on the shed. As I said before, when I started building this, I basically was just going to leave it as a very bare bones shack, at least for a while, and it was a shack for a while, but I realized that I had the frame of a really decent building, and if I just cleaned everything up, I could turn it into a much more useful part of my property than just simple storage. I could turn it into a nice little workshop for myself and have somewhere else to work on projects when I didn't want to be in my cabin. And having been a garage rat as a kid, I really, really appreciated that.
However, there was a ton of work that needed to be done. One of the first things I had to do was redo the roof for the third and final time. I just hadn't done it to the quality I really wanted to, and I needed to overhaul the entire thing to make it as sturdy as it could possibly be for a more finished structure. So to start out, I just took off the roof metal and moved on to a different part of the process. I would be doing that later, but for now it would be good to just have a little bit of extra light for whatever I would be doing inside, which would be adding some windows, which I didn't do at the beginning for a lot of different reasons. One, I just didn't think I'd be in here much, and two, windows are so expensive. I don't know why windows are as expensive as they are. I was only going to put 2 in here, but that really ended up being a pretty sore blow. I think it was $500 for 2 windows. But if I wanted this to be a real building, I think it was well worth it. But putting them in was a much easier process said than done, because I would have to take out big chunks of the frame and build entirely new window frames from scratch that I would have to slot into the places I opened up. I did end up forgetting to put the king studs in on either side of the new frames to really give it the extra support it needed, but I fixed that later, and it was no big deal. At the time, I just screwed in everything from the top, made sure that nothing was crooked, and got to work on cutting out the holes for the actual windows themselves. Since I didn't mention it earlier, and I know people are going to mention it in the comments, I did put the first window on my cabin in upside down, and I did the same thing here entirely by accident. I didn't mean to. It was the same kind of window in the same kind of orientation, and I just flipped it upside down, and I have no idea why, but I'm not gonna fix it either. People get real tense about the windows for some reason. I have never had any problem that has been caused by them being upside down. I just don't open them when it's raining. That's all it is. But anyway, mini rant aside, I got up on the roof after that, and I started dismantling everything. The trusses on the end of either wall were kind of raised a little bit, which meant that none of these top boards were actually sitting in full contact with every board like they were supposed to, so I had to take these down, cut them quite a bit shorter, and put them back on. After that, I measured out the spaces in between the trusses, marked everything out, and put in the bird blocks where they were supposed to be. The whole roof construction is much sturdier now, and I am so glad that I never have to build this thing again. I swear this is the last time. The next morning I got right back into it, finished the bird blocks on the back half, and then got right to work on insulating everything. The walls on this building are much thinner than the ones on my cabin. I used 2x4s because, again, thought it was going to be a shack, but I would like to put a wood stove in it and have it be at least somewhat comfortable when it gets colder out, and this should go a long way in doing that. Unfortunately for me, I accidentally ended up buying unfaced insulation, and for the uninitiated, that means that it doesn't have the nice piece of paper on it, keeps you from having to handle it all the time, and you can staple onto the wall studs, which just means that I had to do a lot more actual physical interaction with the fiberglass, which is never fun. But I made some really quick progress and got as much done as I could until Ian and his girlfriend, Caitlin, came down to lend me a hand. We started by burning the scrap, and I got them working on a bunch of little grunt work things that weren't too difficult at all, but just needed to be done. While in the meantime, I finished up the rest of the insulation and got to work on putting up the vapor barrier. The vapor barrier was definitely overkill, being that the most steam that I'm going to be producing in this place at any given time will probably be like, I don't know, making a cup of coffee in here, but it just seemed like the right thing to do, and I wanted to get this place done to as professional of a standard as I was willing to force myself to do. And if I were to end up with some ice crystals forming in my walls, I would much rather be safe than sorry. With that done, we started mounting the first of the drywall boards before they went home, and I called it a night. We made a ton of progress in that day, and I got up nice and early the next morning to get to work on putting the roof back together. By this point, all the structural stuff that I actually needed to change had been changed. I put in new, much longer screws that would hold it together a lot better. I had put bird blocks on either side and fixed the actual leveling issues, which meant that all I really needed to do was put the tin back on top. And after that was done, I got started on the rest of the drywall, which was tedious but not very difficult at all. Just measure, cut the pieces to size and shape, haul them inside, and tack them up onto the wall. It's not nearly as pretty or aesthetically pleasing as Tongue and Groove is to look at, but at least it's clean and intuitive to use. I spent probably another day or so doing this, and I got almost all of it done, but after a while I was beginning to feel just the effects of the tedium. It is not a very enjoyable process, and it's really hard to make yourself stay at home and do something boring when the entire summer is unfolding right in front of you. So I was really gearing up to leave this to another day and do something different. After all the work that we did on the shed, I was in desperate need of a good long break. Not from building entirely, but from just the monotonous kind of building. What I was going to do next was a very simple project, and one that had been very near and dear to my heart for a long time. I was going to build myself a little garden, and all I would need for that is enough lumber to build a handful of nice planters that I could use for this year's experimentation in growing, because I've never actually had a garden before or grown any kind of crops in any real way. I didn't really know what I was expecting when I got into it and how difficult that might be, how easy or hard it would be for things to grow here, but that's never stopped me before, and in no time at all I had made all the necessary cuts and was ready to put these things together. I had basically just gone online and grabbed the very first design that I found that looked simple to put together, and I followed that to a T. I think it said to use cedar or something, but you know, I've only got pine here, so that is precisely what I used. I was going to put these right in front of my cabin so that when everything grew in, I would get a nice pop of color that would really put some light and life front and center on my land. After I had both of my planters built and put in place, one of the big things that I wanted to get done was really expand my gravel operation, because out in front it was just all this flat, barren dirt, and it didn't look super nice, and I just wanted to fill everything out and make it look as good as possible, which is precisely what I did. With everything cleaned up, I grabbed a giant piece of the plastic I used for the vapor barrier on the shed and started cutting it and forming it to shape inside of the planters so I could keep the wood from rotting as long as possible. I think these will probably last about a decade, but we shall see indeed. After maybe an hour or so, I got both of them lined out, and I grabbed some extra lumber that I had laying around and cut it so I could make a sort of decorative little border and tamp everything down on top and hold it in place. I accomplished this with an old 2x6 that I cut into squares, and then in between those, I took a bunch of the old trim boards that I had just laying around and cut those to shape as well. Didn't have to spend another $1 on it, and it turned out very nice. As the last part of the building process, I sanded down the old boards to take off that sort of veneer of mold and stuff that had grown on it over the past couple of years of being outside, and I got started doing what men do best, digging a big ol' hole. The dirt and clay of this hole is what I would be using to fill up the bottom part of these planters, about halfway up. From there, the rest of it would be bison manure from the field next door, and then after that, I would go buy a bunch of bags of actual fertilizer to make up the very top layer. This mixture and sort of layering process I figured would be more than enough to give my plants exactly what they need to have a really solid growing environment with all the nutrients they would require. Oh, and by the way, when I put out this video for the first time, a lot of you guys told me that I needed to put holes in the plastic liner, otherwise it would just drown my plants. I did do that, I just didn't film it, and I knew even at the time that because I didn't, I was going to get a ton of comments about it. So just don't worry about it, I did get it done. And after a few days of putting all this together, I was finally ready to start planting, which means that I could finally go up to Fairbanks and spend a day enjoying myself and picking out all of the plants that I would want to grow. Most of what I decided to grow this year was flowers, just because I wanted to get my bearings and see how everything would do. And if everything turned out well this year, I would expand next year and do a lot more crops to really sustain myself. But for now, this was all I was going to do, and I came back during probably the first big rainstorm of the year. It was wet, it was cold, it was very uncomfortable, but everything in my mind and heart said, this is the perfect condition to be planting everything. Like, after bringing all these plants home, put them right into this nice wet soil that's super rich in nutrients and everything they need, I couldn't pass up the opportunity. So for probably half an hour or so, I spent a bunch of time putting everything in the ground and getting it planted, not knowing that the next morning would literally be like one of the most beautiful days of the early summer, just nice and sunny and perfect for planting. So I got everything done and I sat back for a minute to just look at how beautiful everything was and enjoy having a little bit of green to liven up my land. And it really was a huge improvement too. Starters are a lot more expensive than I thought they were, but I think it was well worth it in the end. And I had no idea how well everything would do here, because all throughout the summer, both of my planters were incredibly lush and just filled to the brim with life. And it brought me so much joy, and I was so happy to have put in that work. And after that, I just dealt with a little bit more cleaning up and dealt with the refuse of all of the previous projects to get my place looking ready for the next bout of new work. A couple days later, we were getting into full summer, and I was in full gravel mode. I wanted to get everything looking as nice as possible, and I knew that the one way to do that was to make it all uniform with as much definitely not stolen gravel as I could possibly find. I cleaned up all the thin spots on the path and then decided to do this whole patch in just about 20 seconds. It's done. I was really just trying to find all the little busy work things that I had been putting off forever and organize them in my brain and then get them all done in one fell swoop. Which is what I'm doing here with the skill saw and all these old pieces of aspen. These have been laying around for forever and I had gathered them all here to eventually be chopped up into firewood, and I had just never gotten around to it. But they're all nice and dry and we're gonna make great kindling and easy fires when winter comes around. I got the majority of the wood cut and stacked, did a quick gravel trip, and filled out the space around my fire pit to finish out the night. And the next morning came in beautifully sunny, so I got the day started right by tending to my ever-thirsty garden, which by that point was doing really, really well. The mixture of bison manure and fish meal fertilizer was really working as the perfect plant food combo, and everything was getting super lush and staying healthy. The rest of the day I just needed to clean out the shed for some work later on and cut the last couple of drywall sheets I would need before Ian and Jacob came down to help me insulate the ceiling. Being that I only had my car, Jacob was kind enough to pick me up the door I needed in Fairbanks as well, which was super appreciated. An exterior door this time, by the way. Trust me, I learned from my mistake. I might have been able to do the installation myself if it had been faced with paper on one side. I had to do that in the cabin and you can just staple it onto the trusses by the edges, but this being the raw insulation, I needed to hold it in place while someone else stapled the vapor barrier up beneath it, which is not nearly as seamless of a process as I hoped it would be. But eventually we did get it done. The boys went home and I got to work on finishing up the outside and making things look a bit more presentable. Honestly, more than anything, I just wanted the front to at least look good for thumbnails, so I used a smidge of my material budget on the trim to get it looking nice and clean. Which I did basically as quickly hack and slash as I possibly could, because this is not what I want to be doing with my day, and I really just wanted to see how much of a difference the siding would actually make. After that, I got started on what I hoped would be a quick, cheap project that would go a long way as a quality of life improvement that really should have been done a couple years ago, and that's a woodshed. Well, not exactly a shed, I don't really know what word to use for it. It's some kind of structure, maybe a pavilion, but it was going to go over my giant wood pile to keep it out of the rain and the elements. It was honestly a bit more expensive than I hoped it would be, like $600, but it was going to be well worth it once it was done, and I was pretty well convinced I could do it in just a couple of days. To start, I just needed to dismantle my wood pile and start clearing out a bigger space by cutting down a few trees, raking everything down to dirt, and clipping as many roots and small stumps as I could find. It was a shame to have to cut down any more of my aspens, as I really want to give them all the best chance of eventually growing into full height and maturity, but fortunately I was able to get away with just taking out a small handful of some of the smaller ones, and I was good to go. The actual construction was pretty simple and intuitive. All I really had to do was skim my dad's video and pilfer every part of his design, but there were a few little hangups that I had just about overlooked. The main one was, once again, the wretched composition of my soil, if you can call it that. I almost hesitate to call it that because it's probably 70% loose rock packed just close enough together to make it nearly impossible to dig through, but somehow I got lucky enough to have dug through 2 spots of mostly silt and sand, and after that I had no problem sinking my posts and getting to work on the actual build. Ian was in the neighborhood for one of those nights, so he came down and gave me a hand for what was basically the last real part of the process. I'd cut a bunch of small blocks to be screwed into the spaces in the cross beams every 22 inches or so, and with them in place we could throw on a truss, screw it to the block on either side, then rinse and repeat until it was finished. Altogether it only took an hour or so, and even then it could have been cut down a bit further, but it was a beautiful night and we were really in no hurry. The next day, everything was in place for me to bring this project to a close. I just had to throw the tin on top, line everything up, screw it down, and the woodshed was totally finished. I did have to take all the wood that I'd thrown into a pile and restack it, but it was a nice, simple, turn your brain off kind of thing to end out the workday, and I was happy to do it. I had a bit of gravel laying around as well, so I brought in a few more buckets to clean up the space in front of the shed. I was thinking about aesthetics again because with a new project out of the way, I always get excited about cleaning up my property and getting things looking well put together around the new building to see how everything looks in unison. And I gotta say, this one turned out really, really nice. A few days later, I'd had enough of working on side projects and decided it was about time I jumped back into the work on the shed and finished it up once and for all. Really, there wasn't all that much that actually needed to get done at that point. The walls were up and everything was pretty much in place. Most of the remaining work was just finishing up the interior and getting ready to move everything inside. But there was one more major construction thing that needed to get done. At one point I was going to do the ceiling with drywall, but after trying that with Ian's help, it was pretty clear that that would turn out to be uneven and terrible. So after a quick look around Fairbanks, I was able to find these 12-foot lengths of shiplap board that seemed just about perfect, and I'm happy to say it was infinitely easier to put this stuff up than the tongue and groove ceiling in my cabin. I'm pretty sure that had a lot to do with the fact that they weren't 16 feet long, but I was just happy to have a good finished ceiling done and out of the way in just a few hours, which is a pretty big improvement over my previous record of about 1.5 years. With the interior walls and ceiling done, I cleaned up the seams of the drywall and waited for that to set, and then I got to painting. For this project, I wanted to go with this nice deep green. It has a ton of character, and the more I painted on, the more happy with it I became. I did end up having to reinforce the floor since I grabbed the wrong thickness of OSB when I was building the foundation, but it was a quick thing that went a long way in making everything more sturdy, and was a solid foundation to put down a nice sleek set of vinyl. Unfortunately for me, being that this was the first time I had ever done any drywall, I kinda didn't do a very good job cleaning up all the seams in between the boards, so I decided to get around that problem by putting trim over all of the seams that were visible, and it just added a bit of visual intrigue to the wall, and I'm really glad that I did it. All in all, it only took a handful of days to finish up the interior, and I ended up very happy with the final result. Honestly, it's kinda better looking in there than it is inside of my actual cabin, which I was told by quite a couple of my friends. I don't think it's as well put together in there, but it definitely looks very nice and polished. Here it is! Look at that. With the interior of the shed finally fully finished, I picked up one of these collapsible shelves and brought it in so I could finally, after literal years on this land, put all of my stuff in order and get it out of the rain. It was a long time coming, and all I really wanted to do was get everything organized, get rid of my trash, and see my land for the very first time fully cleaned up.
I cannot express with words how good it feels to have everything inside. Almost everything under the cabin and the shed has been removed. Everything from the woods is out of the woods, with just a handful of minor exceptions. All the trash is gone. It's been 2.5 years I've been here, and this is the first time that it's ever been fully cleaned up. And man, that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. And to top it all off, it is a beautiful, beautiful evening. And I think I'll just about call it good.
And that's gonna just about do it. That's about the last 2.5, 3 years of my life condensed down into a couple hours of your time. I've made so many mistakes, I've wasted so much money, but looking back on it, I think my favorite videos to this day are still the ones at the very beginning, when I was just jumping into it, not knowing anything, because that's when me and my friends were all having the most fun, by far. Living like this has just been my reality for the last couple of years, and it's been a crazy one to live out, and I have loved the vast majority of it. I won't say every second, because it hasn't been every second. It's kind of a tough way to live, but it has been really wonderful, and I have you guys to thank for that. Your viewership has allowed me to go on this incredible journey and do so much for myself and live on my own terms, and I'm really, really appreciative of that. So, from the bottom of my heart, thank you guys so much. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for watching. And I've been Mick. Until next time, toil for your food, guys. See you around.